Hello, Bearcam fans. This is Mike Fitz. I'm a fellow with Explore.org and the Bearcams in 2018. And in just a moment, I'm going to be starting a live play-by-play style broadcast from Brooks Falls. So just stand by for that, and we're going to test some audio out in the next minute or so, and we'll go ahead and get started. Well, good afternoon. This is Mike Fitz, a fellow with Explore.org and the Bearcams in 2018. And I'm coming to you remotely from my home base in Washington. And I'm going to do a play-by-play style broadcast over the next hour. So what this is this is not a Q&A session, so I won't be monitoring the chat on Explore.org, nor will I be scrolling through the comments, to look for your questions. What I will be doing this afternoon is just narrating the bear and salmon activity over the next hour. So during this broadcast, I hope to answer a lot of the basic questions you might be having about what the bears are doing in the river right now. I'm in communication with the camera operators that are moving the camera along the river. So not only do I have access to the Brooks Falls cam, but we can also take a look and see what's going on down low on the Falls Low cam. We can check out and see what's happening at the lower river. In fact, going to the underwater cam, we can also take a look and see at some of the above water views at the lower river. Maybe we'll start down here right now because we're looking at a mother and spring cubs. And actually, during our live broadcast so far this year, we have not seen a mother bear and spring cubs yet. So this is number 482. Her nickname is Brett, and this is a fairly old and experienced mother. So 482 is not a bear that I've had the opportunity to really see very often during the course of my time at Brooks River. I first started working at Brooks River as a ranger in 2007, and this year, of course, I transitioned to be working for Explore.org. Before 482 precedes my time there. She was a young adult female that was first identified in 2001, and this is her fourth known litter. You can see some of those cubs are different colors. One of them is very grizzled, almost gray in color. So I think in the fall it'll be quite blonde. And it's not uncommon to see cubs from the same litter to have different colors on them. That's hair color in bears, just like in humans, is controlled by genes. It's possible too that these cubs might have different fathers. Bears are promiscuous during the mating season. So a female bear will go through maybe several estrus cycles where she's receptive to mating, and maybe she's courted during that time by different males. And you can see that gray cub kind of moving into the middle of the frame right now. So one cub near mom, that blonder one in the middle, and then another darker one trailing behind. And while the previous DNA evidence of paternity at Brooks River hasn't documented evidence of multiple paternities within the same litter, it's certainly quite possible. And it's happened in black bears, it's happened in brown bears in different areas of North America. So we're looking straight across the floating bridge at the mouth of Brooks River. This is the only bridge in Katmai National Park. This one is it's removed each fall um, to prevent water and ice damage to it. And I think you see what's going on. We might try to toggle here to another view. So this is a camera that's also across the river. It gives us a little bit more of a clear view of this family as she's walking downstream. Bears in the Brooks River area really love to use the human maintained trails. It's the easiest place to walk. Of course, people don't usually when given the choice don't go bushwhacking, and bears are kind of the same way. They don't want to work any harder than they have to, and it's especially important for a mother bear with caring for 3 young cubs. She has some pretty tremendous energetic challenges that she has to meet in order to successfully raise and wean her offspring. In fact, these cubs might be consuming over a quart of milk per cub per day. So that's a lot of milk that she has to produce. They're primarily at this time of the year still relying on mother's milk for their nutrition. So it's important for her to be efficient in her fishing strategies and her movements, so she can conserve her energy as much as possible. So the cubs look like they're moving into the trees there. I'm not really sure if they're going to follow mom or not. Cubs are often hesitant to get into the water. The water's cold, so it might be a little bit more uncomfortable for them than it would be for the adults. They're also not as strong as swimmers either. So that's another consideration for them, is that they know that it's harder for them to jump in the water. And one cub right now just getting its feet wet. Another one just right behind it. And our camera's kind of bouncing right now. That's actually probably from people on the wildlife viewing platform that are moving back and forth to get a better view of these cubs. And the water in a lot of the places out at the mouth of Brooks River is not particularly deep. It's somewhat shallow in a lot of places. You can see 482 just standing in the water there, so that's going to be a little deeper than the cubs can stand in. But for the adult bears, it's actually fairly easy for them to move around that area. It looks like 482, excuse me, probably spotted a fish in the water there, and that's why she's charging back and forth so much. That also, of course, illustrates her hunger right now. More well-fed bears, especially the ones that are fishing up at Brooks Falls, and we'll go back to there in just a moment. Those bears probably aren't going to be expending as much energy to chase fish because they've been more well-fed. And that's why there's so many bears up at Brooks Falls fishing, is because it is the easiest place to feed. It's the most efficient place to feed. But a lot of mother bears will make the choice to avoid Brooks Falls to give their cubs maybe a bit of extra protection. And that's not true of all mother bears. Many of them will go to Brooks Falls from time to time, but others will choose never to go up there when they have young cubs like this. It looks like 482 is going to swim across the mouth of the river, take her fish up onto the land there. And what is she looking for? Well, she's looking for salmon. And toggling to our underwater camera here, this is located on the floating bridge that we saw just a little bit ago. A really great view of the salmon in the water. This is actually one of my favorite cameras to watch because it's one that if you're at Brooks River, this is a view that you don't get to experience all that much. You get to see mostly sockeye salmon at this time of the year, but you will see some rainbow trout swimming by. You'll also see pink salmon with very prominent white stomachs, and that's probably the easiest way to determine the different species. And then later in the year, we'll probably be able to see some silver salmon moving by that camera too. And of course, there's also some really amazing views of brown bears swimming right by there from time to time. So 482 is still carrying that fish in her mouth, going over to the spit. Mother bears don't share with their cubs. They are often very tolerant of cubs taking fish away from them. But there's a lot of competition within the litter for for scraps and also for access to the most productive teats on a female. The bears have 6 teats, 2 kind of between their hind legs and four up on their chest area. And you can see actually 482 kind of running right there, and it looked like that maybe was a response to the hungry calls of her cubs. She really wanted that fish to herself. She did not want to share. Look to me at least. She did not want to share that fish with her offspring. And again, that's a typical behavior. The cubs really do have to compete for those scraps of fish. They'll be able to pull it away from mom from time to time. Maybe she'll leave them leftovers, but she definitely doesn't share, and she doesn't make sure that the fish is equally distributed between the cubs in her litter. And of course, there's a lot of other activity going on upstream. So we're going to transition back to Brooks Falls here. Right now we're looking downstream from Brooks Falls. Today has been, from what I've seen on the cameras, a fairly productive day for brown bears fishing up in this area. And right in the center of the scene right now might be number 708. She's kind of on the right-hand side, just standing there in the water. And then, of course, several adult bears at Brooks Falls. On top of the waterfall, number 409, Beadnose. She's fairly dark for this time of the year. She's shedding her coat like a lot of these bears are doing. Bears will shed their fur only once a year, and it generally happens in early to mid-summer. Sometimes they'll hold their coat just a little bit longer, and I suspect that might be tied a little bit to their nutritional status. If a bear is really well fed, it seems like it can afford to start to shed its coat a little bit earlier. But sometimes, like mother bears, for instance, that are caring for young cubs, if they're a little thinner, they seem to hold on to their fur coat just a little bit longer. And 409 skillfully catching that fish, moving off of the lip of the waterfall to go eat it in a place that's a bit more secure. Sometimes she'll eat it right there on the lip of the waterfall. But she's opted this time at least to move away with her catch. A couple of adult males in the view right now, and then so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bears. These are all adult males right there fishing at Brooks Falls. The one near the log, very famous, number 480, Otis, fairly recognizable because he's around the waterfall a lot. Floppy right ear, sits in the far pool. And we'll fish in the jacuzzi that's kind of on the closer side to this log here. And hard for me to tell from this perspective, but it looks like maybe number 32, Chunk, in the jacuzzi. And that's that plunge pool below the falls. There's always salmon pooling in there, even on days when there's very few fish jumping at the waterfall. .480 has gained a significant amount of weight, and we're looking at him again. He's gained a significant amount of weight over the past month or so. In fact, we can do a kind of a quick comparison of a picture I took of him in late June this year. So this is him in late June. And you can see that he definitely didn't have nearly as big of a pot belly as he does right now. So 480, definitely having a successful July. Excuse me. Bear actively fishing in the jacuzzi. Again, looks like perhaps number 32, Chunk, another large, mature adult male. He's one that, if this identification is correct, he's one that we haven't really seen too much along the river during the past few weeks. He showed up really just about a week and a half ago. His whereabouts up until then were a bit of a mystery. And I think that's because he was maybe out still kind of chasing girls. This is the very, very end of the mating season right now, but June is the peak of the mating season, and a lot of adult males, if they're not present at Brooks Falls, that's their kind of their main activity in late June and early July. Looking to the far side of the river right now, looks like one bear sitting in the water. This is number 83, another adult male. He often has a lot of small wounds and scars around his face and neck. And then looks like an adult female over on the far wall next to the rocks there, and that is number 854 Divot. If you look carefully, you might be able to see a ring around her neck, and that is from a wire snare that we removed from her in 2014. So healthy adult female. She had cubs last year. She's weaned them and is now a single bear this year. You can see a swarm of gulls moving in there. That you can tell that not a whole lot of fish are being left over for scavengers today, just by that swarm of gulls that moved in and were fighting over scraps. So again, there's a lot of things that you can look for if you're just tuning into the cams. At any moment, you're kind of wondering, well, how many fish are the bears catching today? Look to see how many of them are leaving leftovers. If they're not leaving any leftovers, then that's an indication that and the gulls are fighting over the leftovers. That's an indication that not too many fish have been fed today. We're just getting a little bit of a peek here too of number 801, sort of his hump, and then panning over to 854 Divot, standing in the far pool. While she's over there, you can see, she's staring at the water right in front of her, swiveling her head, probably trying to keep tabs on what the other bears are doing and remain aware of her surroundings. But she's very focused on the water in front of her. That water's not that deep in that spot, so she's able to see down to the bottom. She's able to see any fish that might be swimming in front of her. A little bit of a lunge there, not quite successful. This is what the far pool looks like from the bear's perspective. This is a photo that I took in May a few years ago. And I didn't quite get all the way over to where 854 is standing. She's standing kind of just around the corner on the right-hand side. But this is right at the base of that path on the far side where a lot of bears like to come down to the river. And again, the far pool is a productive place to fish for a lot of bears who have learned to do it. And even in the fall as well. That's a spot where sometimes bears will target during September when salmon are no longer migrating, but they're trying to find the right place to spawn. A lot of salmon will kind of wander into that far pool area, and that allows bears to take advantage of vulnerable salmon. And it looks like this male here in the center of the screen, number 801, has just caught a salmon. We'll watch to see how carefully and how quickly he eats that fish. That'll be an indication of how well fed he is. Downstream of him, 83, also eating a salmon. And then looks like an adult female, maybe number 39, kind of standing down there waiting for scraps. And fairly typical behavior of these bears, standing downstream, just looking for anything that's going to drift in their direction. 708 Amelia right now, again, right on the top side of the island. There's an island, grassy island, just behind her. And it looks like we have another family group that's come into our view down at the mouth of the river, so let's go take a look at them. This is a different family than what we had earlier. So we were looking at 482 Brett earlier with spring cubs. These are yearling cubs. So this is another bear family. This is number 451. And she is also an experienced mother. She's had a litter before. You can see that these cubs are a bit lankier, quite a bit larger, and not as dark as the other family that we're looking at before. So yearlings, not only are they larger and appear larger compared to mom, they're generally also lighter in color. So again, if you're wondering, well, how can I tell the difference between the ages of bear cubs? Those are a couple of things that I look for. I look for their relative size compared to mom, and then I also look for their color, because yearling cubs are usually blonder than spring cubs. And spring cubs are bears in their first year, so we were looking at first year cubs at the beginning of the broadcast, and now we're looking at yearling cubs. So this is their second summer, and it could be their last summer with mother. Cubs have to absorb a lot of lessons from mom about where to find food, what's good to eat. They don't have a whole lot of time to stay with her. It's possible that she could keep them through another summer, but often mothers will wean their cubs at the beginning of the cubs' third summer. So they'll become independent bears. Subadult bears is what we have described those juvenile bears as. So this definitely could be the last year with mom that these cubs will experience. And the bond between mother and cubs is very strong while they're together, but it breaks up pretty quickly in the springtime once the female returns back into that estrus cycle. And the female may, kind of charge her cubs from time to time, but often what really separates mom and cubs is just the presence of an adult male who's picked up on the scent of the female and understands that she might be becoming back into her estrus cycle, maybe receptive to mating. And the cubs realize, hey, this is kind of a weird situation. I don't want to be around these big adult males who are paying attention to my mother, so we'll just go about our separate ways. If we get a look at 451 walking, you really probably won't notice anything that's peculiar about her gait. She seems to be walking normally, but she did have a very pronounced limp for a couple of years. And she was able to persevere through that. Even during the first time she had cubs, she had a very severe limp, and now it looks like that's completely healed. So it wasn't something that she was able to heal over 1 year. The bears have really remarkable abilities to persevere through injury and pain. They have the ability to, even when they're hibernating, to heal. So they can heal external wounds on their body. They can heal broken bones when they're hibernating. So their physiology is really well adapted to survive, the rigors of the environment and the competition that they face from other bears. Yearling cubs are, again, more experienced than small spring cubs. They're much more confident swimmers, larger, of course. And these bears, these yearlings might weigh about 100 pounds right now. Spring cubs at the end of their first summer are going to weigh, between 60 and 70 pounds. Looks like a bit of play too going on among this bear family here. So mom just doing a little bit of sparring with one of those cubs. Sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between a fight and just a play fight on the cams. Generally, play fights, while energetic, they don't have the intensity of a real fight. And real fights are often very, very short in duration, too. So the movements are very quick and violent in an actual fight. If you see two bears kind of drifting downstream and they're kind of cuffing each other for prolonged periods of time, that's almost always a play fight. And the cubs, they do sort of reflect the relaxed nature of mom, so to speak. So if mom is relaxed, the cubs will be relaxed. And this actually might be the first time I think I've ever seen 451 play with her cubs. So she probably has had a good few days catching salmon. Now the whole family's going to move downstream and probably enjoy a bit of a chase. When mom is nervous, the cubs are nervous. But when she's relaxed and playful, the cubs are also relaxed and playful. And these are challenging sort of situations to manage for rangers down at Brooks River. You don't see any people in the frame right now, but there's people standing on the wildlife viewing platform where this camera is located. There are people in the woods behind the family. There are people that want to cross back and forth over this bridge at the mouth of Brooks River. So giving these bears space can definitely be difficult from time to time. Because this is an area that's it's really a bottleneck for people and bears. It's perfect bear habitat. There's so much food and places for them to rest. They feel safe in this location. And of course, this is the exact same places where there are people facilities. So rangers do work really, really hard to make sure that bears have access to the resources they need to survive. So if you're at Brooks River, standing in this along the trail in the forest there, a ranger might ask you to kind of back off and give bears space. And it's not only for your own safety, but it's really for the welfare of the bears more than anything else. Because it would be easy for us as a group if there were 10, 20 people approaching this family. In many cases, it would be easy for a group that large to displace the bear from the trail or from the river if we so chose to. But we know that this lower river especially is very important for family groups and younger bears. So the rangers do try to give the families and all bears down at the mouth of the Brooks River as much space as possible. We're going to pan back up to Brooks Falls because there's another kind of young bear kind of continuing her story. And it just moved out of the frame. Maybe be able to catch up to that bear. They sometimes do move a little quicker than the cameras can keep up with. So there's one bear on the far side of the bank there. You can kind of see it looking around for scraps. That's a young bear, maybe on its first or second summer on its own, so not very big. Moving around on the fringes of the waterfalls looking for scraps. So when we're looking at bears at Brooks River, there's all of these sort of different stories that each one of them tells about the bear world. We could look at mothers and cubs and see how protective they are and maybe how playful they are. So we're seeing that story of learning within and care within the bear family. But also we can see these other stories of learning and maturation and perhaps caution amongst the young independent bears at Brooks River. And we see that in a lot of different, a lot of different ways. So here's another pair of young bears on the Falls Low Cam. These two bears, they appear to be siblings. They're hanging around together a lot, and sometimes young bears will hang together during their first summer while they're on their own. It's probably less likely that they're going to go into the same den, but that's also possible. You can imagine, maybe the shock of being suddenly separated from your mother in the springtime after she's been your sole provider over the past couple of years, and all of a sudden you have to apply those lessons that you hopefully learned. So these bears could have been brought to Brooks Falls by their mother. They remember, this is an important place for them to fish. And I think those bears, let's see if I can bring up a photo of them, give you another view. Again, I think these are the two bears that were just on the camera. So siblings, about the same size. Their faces are very, very similar in shape, and their ears are very similar in shape too. So again, they look so close in appearance physically that I suspect that they are siblings. Back on our falls cam, we do have looks like an adult female just kind of standing in the water right there, and again another young subadult bear right behind that one. And that one that's walking through the water looks like 717, and that's a young adult here, or excuse me, young subadult. And let me look up that bear's age. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but I don't want to keep you on the still photo. But this is a still photo of 717. Very sort of distinctive coat color, grizzled blonde. Now we're and again that adult female just standing in the water looking for scraps. But you will see all of these younger bears again trying to test, excuse me, whether or not they can hack it at Brooks Falls, make a living here. Scavenging fish is an important way for them to gather food resources at this time of the year. And those younger bears and smaller bears definitely don't need nearly as much salmon to survive. So even if they're picking up one or two salmon carcasses a day, they can make a profit in calories just with that low level of success. And we're about halfway through our broadcast here. So I want to reintroduce myself if you're just tuning in. My name is Mike Fitz, and I am a fellow with Explore.org and the Bear Cams in 2018. And you're looking at live footage of Katmai National Park, Alaska. So Katmai is located about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, Alaska. There are no roads that lead to Anchorage to Katmai, so it's only accessible by plane or boat, or one very, very long hike. And people have done that from either like the villages, surrounding the area, like King Salmon. Sometimes people have walked to Brooks Camp from King Salmon if you can get a ride across one of the rivers. But most people who arrive are doing so by plane. And Brooks River is such an important place for bears to feed because this is one of the few spots in early summer where salmon are accessible to bears. There are very few places where salmon can be caught at this time of the year by brown bears, so that's one reason why there's such a large gathering of brown bears right in this area. Really great look at some young bears sitting right at the base of the falls. These bears are sub-adult bears. You'll hear us throw that term around a lot. They are juvenile bears that are generally between the ages of 2.5 and 5.5 years old, so they're not fully mature, but they're independent of their parents. So they're a bit like the teenagers of the bear world. They can kind of get by, but there's still a lot of life lessons that they need to learn before they are successful. A survival rate of an adult bear is actually pretty high. So once these bears kind of make it to adulthood around 6 years old, the chances of them surviving from year to year is actually very high. For an adult female, it's probably above 90%. And especially when there's so much food available to them, it's the ability to gain weight is only going to be easier for them as the summer progresses, because salmon are spreading throughout the watershed right now. They're beginning to spawn in a lot of smaller streams, so bears are going to be able to disperse into those areas and find easy fishing opportunities in just a short while. In fact, we might see bears starting to disperse from Brooks River even right now, as they know this is about the time of the year where they can find food in different locations. You can see there's a lot of young bears just hanging on the downstream side of the waterfall. Fairly typical of a scene where that maybe there's not a lot of fish in the water just in this moment. There was an adult male that came out of the jacuzzi, that plunge pool at Brooks Falls, so he's kind of at center left eating a salmon, and as soon as he finishes, you'll see other bears kind of creep up in that direction to try to pick up any scraps that he's left behind. So these big adult males up at Brooks Falls, they may be dominating the best places to fish, but they are also facilitating the transfer of food and energy to a lot of different creatures because they're catching so much salmon. So not only younger bears, but also the gulls, the magpies, the eagles, things like that, or creatures like that will be looking to pick up salmon that might not be able to catch a lot of fish on their own. Bear with me for just a second while I send a message to our camera ops. Again, we're looking at number 32 chunk here, eating a salmon. Just laying in the water, not really wanting to even move out of the water. Often I think that these bears can get so fat that it's more comfortable for them to remain in the water, where the water can help support their stomach and their really heavy weight, than it is for them to be out of the water. And of course, competition fishing spots might be one reason why they don't want to move too far away. If you move out of your fishing spot too far, then other bears may try to move into there, and then you're going to have to either shove them out of the way or wait your turn. And while number 32 here is a very big bear, there are other bears here that are more dominant than him. So he may lose his fishing spot if some of those other bears decide to take that jacuzzi. Good look at his face there. He has kind of a distinctive face, some fairly prominent brow ridges, right at his eyes. He has also sort of a two-toned color, and that's one of the ways that I'm able to distinguish him from other bears. So lighter towards the front, a little bit darker towards the back. And he's also sort of very walrus shaped, so a very, very big butt to him, sort of in a similar vein to 480 Otis, which we saw kind of at the beginning of the broadcast. You can see a lot of scars on his head and shoulder area, and those are most likely from fights with other adult males. It's not uncommon for adult males to come to Brooks Falls with open wounds, and sometimes very large open wounds. Most likely they weren't, especially at this time of the year, at a different fishing spot, fighting over salmon at a different stream. Those scars and wounds are probably from him fighting with another adult male for access to females, or perhaps, maybe an animal carcass that happens to be, that was a winter-killed moose or something like that. Now here, number 32 getting up and moving away from that jacuzzi area. He's actually approaching number 480 Otis. He's a bit of an enigma in a sense, because he's a very large bear, but he often doesn't throw his weight around like some of the other really large dominant adult males. He will challenge other bears, and we're seeing that right now. You can see that directed approach towards 480. And he wasn't looking for 480's fishing spot. Really what he was looking for was any leftover salmon that that Otis has. So that was not necessarily, I don't think, a strong attempt to steal, but he was looking for any leftover salmon, and it looked like he got some. So when you see one bear approaching another, at the waterfall especially, you can be reasonably confident in many situations that the one that's doing the approaching is the more dominant bear. So 480, just kind of staring off downstream right now. I'm not sure if he's going to go back to fishing. Number 83 is the bear at the top right, who is eating his salmon. He has a very distinctive scar on his rump, and you can just see a little bit of that when the water is not splashing in front of it. We have some active fishing going on right next to the platform. So again, those two young bears trying to find any fish, and it's a difficult place for bears to fish in that spot. Salmon have a lot of escape routes, and that's why you don't see bears trying too hard to fish in that location for prolonged periods of time, just because it can be difficult when the salmon densities are low. Now we're looking again at number 83. Again, you can see that scar that he has on his rump. So that's a fairly distinctive feature. Even in the fall, after he grows his thick fur coat back in, there will be sort of like a little divot in that spot. So it's one of the ways that I'm identifying him in the fall. These bears do change quite a bit in appearance from early summer to late summer, because they gain so much weight. They grow in new fur coats. Their new fur coats are often darker than in the early summer. So it can take a while sometimes for me and other experienced people to really figure out who we're looking at, if we're looking at the same bear. There are different bears here that will come in September and October who don't use the river in July as well. So those bears are off, in different places making a living right now. But many of the bears that we see on the cameras at this time of the year will also be back in late summer. And of course, these fish these bears are all looking for salmon. The number of salmon coming into the Brooks River watershed this year is actually going to be very high. Probably close to 500,000 fish will move through the Brooks River this year. So that equates a lot of fishing opportunities for bears. So this will be, even for young bears or bears that didn't have a lot of opportunities to fish for salmon earlier in the summer, earlier in July, they're going to have the opportunity to really gain a lot of weight very, very quickly. And coming up in late summer too, they may, and even right now when they're eating so much fish, and they might be able to gain a couple of pounds a day very easily. And some of these fish might be moving up to Brooks Falls, and they may try to jump the waterfall and spawn farther upstream. But a lot of those fish will be staging down at the mouth of Brooks River just to wait for the right time to move into the river to spawn. There will be many fish that will spawn downstream of Brooks Falls, and those aren't necessarily fish that are inferior of the ones upstream of the waterfall. Most of the fish that are downstream of the waterfall are just fish that chose to spawn there. That's where they were born. So sockeye salmon and most Pacific salmon will go back to the same stream on almost the exact same spot where they were born. So that's one of the really amazing things about their life history. They're going out to the ocean to gain most of their body mass after they're born, but they come back to the same places where they were born to spawn. And if that happens to be downstream of Brooks Falls, then that's what they're doing. So it's wonderful, I think, to kind of get this real life aquarium view of the salmon downstream. And again, look for pink salmon at this time of the year. There, a few hundred of those. There's one in the frame right now. A few hundred of those will move into the river each year. Pink salmon have a very distinctive white belly that helps to separate them out from sockeye salmon. We're seeing sockeye salmon transition into their spawning colors right now, but most of them are tinted silver. But you will see some that are starting to turn red, and their heads will become green. So they look like much different fish. And here comes a pink salmon right now swimming by. So really good look at one of those pink salmon. Those are the smallest of the anadromous Pacific salmon. Most of these jumping the waterfall are sockeye. Very silver in color. They generally lack spots. And one of the real reasons why you see so many bears fishing the lip of the waterfall right in that spot is because that's primarily the only place where salmon can jump the waterfall successfully. So if you want to catch fish jumping the waterfall, you have to stand in that location. Most of the jumps are actually not successful. It takes a lot of attempts to do it. The success rate is actually less than 7% from what I counted. So the salmon just have to jump a number of times before they make it. But most who want to jump up above the waterfall will eventually do so. Looks like number 32 moving away from the island. We have an adult female, number 708, just kind of standing on the top of that island. She's looking pretty pudgy too. So the fatter females will have cubs more frequently, and they'll have larger litters. So they're fattening up, of course, to survive winter hibernation. But a lot of these single females need those fat reserves to help sustain their cubs' growth next winter and spring. They'll give birth in the den, and they'll need those fat reserves to help nurse the cubs until they come back and find food at Brooks River next summer. And a lot of movement downstream of Brooks Falls. Again, downstream of the falls, generally those are bears that at this time of the year are younger or smaller than the adult males up at Brooks Falls. Occasionally, adult males will go down and will sit in the water there because there's a few pockets where you could sit and wait for fish to swim in front of you and kind of pounce on them. But most of the time, downstream of the falls in the riffles area, kind of looking at, again, those juvenile bears, or you're looking at small adult females. And perhaps another pair of siblings moving towards the camera right now. So these are, again, young bears. They're probably only a few years old. It can be difficult to tell, exact ages on a lot of these bears because sometimes there are runts in the litter, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're less likely to survive to weaning. But they're definitely smaller, so they can look like they're maybe a year younger than they actually are. But definitely a young bear here. Not only are subadults, kind of defined by their size, but also their shape as well. So if you're wondering, hey, I'm just kind of curious about how you can tell that this is a young juvenile bear. Their heads are, just like in people, sort of like bigger in proportion to their size when they're younger. Their legs are often lankier. They're not nearly as well filled in. They don't have very thick necks like adults do. And especially adult males, they're lacking the scars that adult males happen to have. They also don't really behave in the same manner either as adults. They're often moving around quite frequently, sort of in a way looking a bit unsure about what to do. They're unsure about their place in the hierarchy, except for knowing that they're at towards the bottom. So adults move through the river certainly in a more confident manner, a more experienced manner. They kind of know where they want to go. They know what they want to do. And subadult bears, younger bears, don't necessarily behave in that same way. Younger bears are also, as a group, a bit more tolerant of older bears, or excuse me, of each other than older bears are. So they're more apt to play. The frequency of play certainly decreases as cubs age, or excuse me, as subadults age. So as these bears reach adulthood, they're less likely to play than they are right now. So again, there are these physical features that allow us to, determine whether we're looking at young bears versus older bears, but there's also behavioral differences as well. Younger bears have an easier time gaining weight on vegetation than large adult males, especially. This is something that is just refreshing my mind on today doing some reading. So when these bears aren't catching salmon, they may be able to go into the forest, graze on vegetation. When the berries come into season, they're going to be able to eat berries and gain weight on that less energetic source of foods than adult bears. So large adult males really do need a very higher, or in this ecosystem at least, a higher proportion of salmon in their diet to attain their maximum body size. For them, it's not really worth grazing on grass, but these younger bears, they can definitely do that and still gain weight. So there's multiple opportunities for these bears to survive and make a living. So even though they might not be catching a lot of fish today, for instance, they can still go into the forest and still gain some energy and nutrition from other food sources. Moving to the log at the waterfall right now, it looks like number 708. Sometimes people will look at a bear like her and say, boy, she's not that big. Is this a young bear? Is this a subadult bear? No, she's a fully mature adult female. Adult males, though, they kind of they set the curve as far as size goes. So they are quite large. The biggest adult males at this time of the year are going to be 900 pounds or more. And they can outweigh the adult females maybe by twice as much in some cases. So an adult female like 708 might only be 400 pounds, which is still a sizable animal for sure. But she is very much so dwarfed by the larger adult males. She's a female that we often don't see kind of fishing at the waterfall very often. I see her more often sort of hovering on the fringes, but maybe there's an opportunity that she realizes where this near pool area where the jacuzzi is, near that log, there's some rocks she can stand on. So she might recognize that there's an opportunity to do a little bit of fishing here. Bears are very opportunistic. They're smart animals. They can recognize when there's access to new food resources. Their intelligence and curiosity sort of lends towards that as well. So they're able to exploit these opportunities, when they are available. So you can teach an old bear new tricks. That's certainly something that we've seen happen here. Fully mature bears coming down the Brooks River, trying things at the waterfall in different ways that we've never really seen them attempt to do before. And 708 has been to Brooks River for a long time. She was raised here as a cub, spent her subadult years in this area, has already had a couple of litters. So, she's a very experienced bear, and this is not her first time at the waterfall, her first go around here, but she's able to definitely try new things if the opportunity presents itself. Down at the mouth of the river, one bear is sitting, looking at the water. The mouth of the river at this time of the year is a difficult place to fish. The water is fairly high in the lake for this period of time. Usually it's a little bit lower. But when you have so much water at the mouth of the river and in the lake, it's just difficult for bears to fish down here. So that's why we're not seeing as many bears typically down at the mouth of the river. This will change come September. So if you're watching the bear cams in September, the lower river cameras really will be the places to look for to see the majority of the bears fishing as they're fishing for dead and dying salmon. All of those slow moving portions of the river will capture dead and dying fish as they drift downstream, and the bears kind of just cruise along like battleships looking to pick up anything that can't get out of the way. And I'm going to conclude the broadcast here in just a moment. We're looking at a few adult females in the back, and then a couple of adult males sitting in the middle ground. This is certainly a day that it looks like some bears are getting really well fed. Others have to work a bit harder for their meals. Down at the mouth of the river, we were able to see a couple of bear families